In this video, I am going to demonstrate the Box and Whiskers chart in Excel. I'm going to first implement the Box and Whiskers chart, and then I will talk about what the data in it means. So we start with some data, and we want to understand a little bit better what the distribution of that data looks like. So I have two data sets here. I have monthly sales for our great salesperson and monthly sales for our terrible salesperson. So I'm going to create a Box and Whiskers chart showing both of these data sets. So first I select the data sets, I go to Insert, and then there's a little drop down here which lets me see all charts. I can change to all charts, and towards the bottom is the Box and Whiskers chart. So we click OK. I'm going to make the chart, I'm going to move the chart up here and make it a little bit bigger for us to see more easily. So this is our Box and Whiskers chart. First thing we need to do is give our chart a title. So we will call this monthly sales Box and Whiskers. So every chart needs a title. The x-axis, you can see this one down here as part of the x-axis, is pointless for this chart, so I'm going to remove it. I click delete. The y-axis, of course, needs a name. So we go into this plus, which lets me add or subtract chart elements. Axis titles, the primary vertical axis. It puts an axis title here, and I want to call this monthly sales as well. Looks like I misspelled monthly sales. Monthly sales. And now we have our chart. We can tell from the chart that the blue is the great salesperson and the orange is the terrible one. But I would like there to be a legend, which is going to tell that to me. I'm going to put that at the bottom. Okay, so now we have our chart. A couple more things about this chart that I'd like to do in terms of display. I would like to see some numbers, so I'm going to click on data labels, and that's going to give me numbers which are descriptive about this chart. Now, the first thing I notice with these numbers is I don't like the formatting, right? Some of these numbers have no decimal places, some have one, some have two, so I'd like that to be consistent. If we either go off to the right where this gray area may be, and it says Format Data Labels. Alternatively, I can right-click on one of the numbers and click Format Data Labels, and it will give me some choices. So I want to change the number formatting. Number, 2 decimal places is great. Let's do the same here. Number formatting, number, 2 decimal places is again great. So my data is starting to look good. One thing I don't like in this chart, and it's not necessary for Box and Whiskers, is this number in the middle of the box. If I'm going to have this number in the middle of the box, then I really need to sort out the formatting of that number, because if you look at the blue box here, we can just about make it out. And if I look carefully, it says 118.75. But if I want it to be there, I want it to show up. This is the mean of the distribution. The mean is not often shown on a Box and Whiskers chart, so I'm just going to remove it. Again, I click on my data series inside the box, not on a number. I can right-click, Format Data Series, or I can simply go over to this gray box, and I'm going to remove the Show Mean markers. I've got to do that for both data sets. And now we have a pretty standard Box and Whiskers chart. Now, a couple things about the numbers that are showing up. We've got 3 numbers here. Let's look at the great salesperson. We have 3 numbers, 109, 117.5, 124.75. These are our quartiles, the first, second, and third. The first quartile, 25% of the observations are below. Second quartiles are median, 50% above and below. Third quartile is where 25% of the observations are above. over here on the left, I'm going to compute these. So if I type in quartile, I can see there are two versions of this function. There's a quartile.exclusive and a quartile.inclusive. I think exclusive is pretty standard, so we're going to use that. The calculations are slightly different, but for our purposes, it really doesn't matter. We can change our chart, so our chart is set up to use exclusive. We can change it to use inclusive if we wanted to. The numbers change a little bit. I'll just use exclusive. So my array is going to be sales, making a structured formula here, sales, great, comma, and I'm going to use first quartile. If I copy this formula down, I get second quartile and third quartile. Here, I'm going to do the same thing. Sales, terrible, comma, first quartile, second and third quartile. So you'll see these numbers appear on our monthly sales in our Box and Whiskers chart. The interquartile range is the difference between the third and the first quartile. So in the first, the great salesperson has an interquartile range of 1575, which means he's pretty consistent in his sales. The terrible one has a wider interquartile range, 23, so he's less consistent in his sales. And then we have these outliers. So in a Box and Whiskers chart, outliers are defined to be either above the third quartile plus 1.5 times the interquartile range, or below the first quartile minus 1.5 times the interquartile range. So we take the above, so third quartile plus 1.5 times the interquartile range, or first quartile minus 1.5 times the interquartile range. Copy those over. So what does this mean? The Box and Whiskers chart defines points as outliers if they lie outside of this range. So we can see on the great salesperson, they have 2 points that are outliers above 148 and one below 85.38. The terrible salesperson has 1 sales above 97.25, which is the 110, and 1 below 5.25, which is the 5. Now, what the Box and Whiskers chart then does is says the whisker is at the minimum, the first whisker, the lowest one, is at the minimum value in the distribution, which is not an outlier, so 100. And the top whisker is at the maximum value in the distribution, which is not an outlier. So every point in the distribution lies between 100 and 130, unless it's an outlier, or between 33 and 77, unless it's an outlier. The other thing we can see in our Box and Whiskers chart is that the median, this line here in the middle, the 117.5, is pretty much in the middle of the box for the great salesperson. They're pretty consistent, right? The box is relatively small, the median's in the middle. The terrible salesperson, the median's towards the top of the box. That means 50% of the observations are above 55 and 50% are below